Hello everyone and welcome tonight. Thank you for joining us. I'm Charles Quick and I'm co-curator of In Certain Places, an artistic research project at the University of Central Lancashire. Throughout the autumn, we're inviting people to rethink the way that their neighbourhoods are planned for a series of creative infrastructure labs led by the artists Julia Heslop, Emily Speed and Gavin Renshaw. This is a programme of online and on-the-ground activities aimed at local people and decision makers in Preston's City Deal areas, as well as anyone with an interest in creating more livable places. Today we're broadcasting live on YouTube, so if you'd like to contribute to the conversation or have any questions, please use the comment section of YouTube, but you will have to log in to YouTube first. We'll try and address them towards the end of the discussion. I'd like to thank everybody who's been involved in organising the event, the artists, guest speakers, and the team at In Certain Places for making it possible. So finally, I'd like to invite the artist Gavin Renshaw and his guests to join us. Tonight he's going to talk about how can we move through the city more freely. Gavin, hello.
Hello, Charles.
And there we go.
Hi, everyone.
Well,
hello, everybody.
Excellent. So thank you, Charles, and thank you to In Certain Places for hosting this online event. And to those of you who've tuned in, I'm an artist and illustrator based at the Burley in Preston. I've been cycling around Preston for a long time now, and I'd just like to give you a little background information about how some of this project started and how it has developed over the years. I suppose it kind of began as a self-initiated project, which In Certain Places kindly supported and included in their expanded city programme. They'd commissioned a number of artists to produce work in response to the Preston and South Ribble City Deal development, which was investing £434 million to expand transport infrastructure and build more than 17,000 new homes over the next 10 years. So this project here began kind of as a portrait of the city from afar and the landscape in between, really. At first, the bicycle was purely just the mode I'd chosen to explore with, really, and to reach isolated places and also to be able to stop when and where I wanted and take photos and make sketches. So the city was always the inspiration and kind of became the muse for wandering by bicycle and finding locations at certain points on rides where you could kind of glimpse a view of the skyline. Can't quite get my slideshow to work.
I suggest you...
Beg your pardon. Here we go. I think that's it. There we go. Sorry about that. So I began compiling these photographs of Preston from some distance away and was kind of marking the locations on the map that you can see there on the left. This eventually became a series of bicycle rides incorporating all the locations of the viewpoints. So the map kind of includes the whole central Lancashire area, and the rides kind of extended out towards Blackpool, Bowland, Blackburn, South Ribble, Bolton, and of course Preston, which was in this moment of expansion. There was also a publication and photographs of the 42 views, which you can see there on the right. That was shown at the Harris Museum and Art Gallery. So this photograph shows kind of everything within the Guild Wheel and kind of anyone in the area who rides a bike recreation really knows how great the surrounding landscape is for cycling, and key infrastructure like the Guild Wheel allows people to kind of circumnavigate sections of the city and to access routes beyond and to neighbouring towns and villages. It's been a real success story for Preston, I think, and one which I kind of feel planners should develop further and kind of continue in the same process. But I wanted to look at what was within the Guild Wheel for people to get themselves to and from those city limits. So for the connected city, I started to explore and document everything within this area using the Guild Wheel as the boundary, and look at how people could travel around sustainably under their own steam to access that wider network. So I began kind of researching and customizing some of the data specifically for the bicycle user. So for instance, to help me build up a topographical map layer, I was given elevation data from the UCLan geography department to really kind of understand the contours of the city better. So this is the final map, and I was beginning to kind of critique what had been built to a certain degree, and combining this with information from government statistics on like collision data, which kind of confirmed the whereabouts of dangerous junctions and traffic black spots. So those are the kind of red sections you can see there on the map. And I was also looking at what bicycle facilities were available. So things like the national and regional routes, which kind of come in from the edges, and some of them traverse right the way through the city. Some storage options, so whether that was undercover or open air kind of places to put your bicycle, and of course cycle lanes and on and off road trails. So my own routes are the dashed orange sections, which are kind of I suppose they kind of link the districts and communities across the city on reasonably quieter roads. So that those are kind of the ones that were kind of my own suggestion, really. Collating all this information was giving me a clearer picture of the assets and also the shortfalls of our cycle infrastructure. You can actually download this map from the In Certain Places website via the Expanded City project. This is my favourite piece of Preston cycle infrastructure. It's in Brookfield Park. I kind of feel like it should have 2 bits of wood on either side of the steps, and we could turn it into kind of a BMX kind of jump ramp or something. It would have probably proved more useful. But I suppose more seriously, I was kind of beginning to look at infrastructure in more focus, and the consideration and provision for other forms of mobility, really, not just walking and cycling. So, whether that's skateboards or scooters or recumbents or wheelchair users and, tandems, all that kind of thing. But, so some of the paths have steps which, you'd have to carry your equipment over, or gates which were too narrow, or sections that were prone to kind of flooding and things like that. So all of those things were kind of included on the map as well. And I started to think, more openly about the users of this kind of infrastructure. Because that kind of modal share really of infrastructure designated to these alternatives is either poorly designed or hugely underproportioned to a certain degree. So this evening we've kind of posed the question, how do we move through the city more freely, as the title for the discussion. And it's kind of purposefully ambiguous to a certain degree, as I think for most people, COVID-19 and the lockdown have been in an incredibly restrictive time. But to some, I suppose, they also might see it as being quite liberating. There's maybe not quite the right phrase, but maybe some newfound freedoms. There's been a lot of headlines, in the UK press about a bike boom and cycle shops not being able to keep up with demand. And we've all enjoyed the reduction in noise, which has allowed us to reconnect with nature, if not only temporarily. And seeing kind of whole families out on bicycles which would usually be on busy streets, kind of enjoying the reduction in vehicle traffic has been really great. So that's been really good. But at the same time as well, we've all been restricted to a certain degree. I suppose the noticeable thing is space, and especially personal space has become a big issue, and the space to move around safely has primarily been thrown into the limelight. And an interesting byproduct of the COVID pandemic is the pop-up cycle lanes. I think these first appeared in Paris, but they were then kind of echoed around the world to kind of assist the move away from public transport. Kind of Lancashire applied for emergency actual travel funding for the installation of temporary cycle lanes, which also included the widening of footpaths and the closing of roads to allow more pedestrian space. That equated to around £700,000 for 30 kilometres of cycleway enclosure measures across the county. Now, I've been able to cycle most of these in Preston, and I think that they kind of vary in usefulness and in suitability, especially in regard to their location. Many are far too short or a little disconnected, and kind of dislocated really from other routes. I think that councils have had a very short period to put these in place and to plan and implement them to a certain degree. So some of that will have to be forgiven. But I think what is really interesting is how these could potentially be used as a means of testing the water and experimentation, and how effective they might be, and what role they may play really in planning for the future, especially with cycle infrastructures in regard to kind of the government's proposed green transport plan for the coming decades. So this evening we're lucky enough really to be joined by two guest speakers. The first one being Stefan Bendiks, an architect, planner and Dutch cycling ambassador. He has an architecture practice based in Brussels called Artgineering, which has lots of fascinating projects, namely, numerous publications, namely Traffic Space, Public Space and Cycling for a Better City, a roadmap for the conception of an inclusive bicycle master plan, which sounds fantastic. Hello, Stefan.
Hello, Gavin. Okay, now I can just give it a go, right? You see the presentation? Presentation, perfect. Now I'm very happy to join this evening discussion and to present some of my works. I don't know Preston, I have to say, but from what Gavin told me, I was quite intrigued by the Preston model, but that's another issue. So I'm going straight to my things I want to show you, and to give you a short. I have to still click on something else because I cannot move on right now. Let me see.
Hi, Stefan. You can use your keys on your keyboard, your left and right keys.
Yeah, that doesn't work for some odd reason.
Yes,
so I go like this, now it works, right? Okay, perfect. I have to be in that view. Okay, to give you a little hint about what I'm doing. So with my office engineering, we do write about infrastructure and public space, a big interest in cycling. We also advise cities and do master planning. But we also, and I think that's the most important aspect of my work, is we also really transform traffic spaces. So really do hands-on work. On this page you see on the left upper side, a space as we found it, a little square in Brussels, and on the right lower image, it's the exact same space from a slightly different angle, but that's how we transformed it. So we really transform traffic spaces that are now occupied by mainly cars for parking, for driving, for any other kind of car-related usage, and we give it back to people and have a multiple use of the space. So that's what we do in practice. Now, when it comes to today's issue, how can we move through the city more freely? I think the answer is quite simple, and you can put it down to one or two words. It's car-free. So if you want to move more freely through the city, I think it's all about reoccupying some space that is assigned or was assigned to cars. And I like the term of car-free, not in the sense of being completely free of cars, but to free ourselves from the dominance of cars that is omnipresent. If you look through our cities, I will come to that in a minute. And to really, experience this freedom. I think, Gavin, you just mentioned also the crisis was a kind of way to do so. It's a bit ambivalent because, of course, COVID-19 is not a nice thing, but it's also indeed an opportunity to re-experience this freedom in many ways. So less cars and all the things you could do, parks who get full of people again, parks next to highways and so on, people using streets for cycling and walking. And in some way, this reminded me of a project we did in the past, because this kind of moment of crisis we have now with COVID, we actually kind of, not in the same way, but we kind of imitated that in an art project. And I put that in because I know that James' stuff will be so cool later on that I wanted to show at least also one cool project. And it was done in 2007. And we did an art project for a new to be opened not a highway, but a kind of dedicated road with no access for bikes and pedestrians. So we proposed to make, before the road got open for public, for cars and for trucks, to make this event called, if you translate it, the most fun traffic jam of the Netherlands. So what we actually tried to do is to bring that system of the highway to a lockdown before it actually opened by provoking a massive tailback. And we invite people to come with cars, with bikes, whatever they want, and to just do on the street whatever they want. And that's how it looked like. So we had a lot of students of mine and collaborators of the office and friends dressed up in those white suits. They were our traffic jam stewards, how you would call it in Dutch. And they already organized at the entrance of the highway a traffic jam. So it worked perfectly. And then we basically did not more than, fixing some main activities. Like we had some really big things we wanted to do, something there, like sport clubs and companies and so on. So that those ones we organized, but for the rest we just told the people, come on this street. It will be the only day ever you can do whatever you want, because the next day it was open for traffic and you could only drive through it and have fun. And that's how it looked. It was a 12-kilometer long stretch, and people were just allowed to do whatever they want under the premises. They don't damage the road, because I was personally responsible by the highway authority that any damage had to be covered by ourselves. But it worked perfectly well. It was a very, very cool day. People did all kinds of stuff. We had a local shepherd bring his sheep over the street, because we thought sheep's a great way to provoke a traffic jam. The police was there, of course, as well. It was a very cool atmosphere. This is a local jeu de boule. This is kind of pétanque in French club, who came with a truck of sand and they put it on the street. And I told them, you have to take that away tonight. And they actually did. I was very afraid that they wouldn't, but they cleaned it up and they played jeu de boule one day on this highway. But most people just did this. They just took advantage of this one day where the system is not, working the way it should, And they had a great time enjoying the view because it was a very beautiful Dutch landscape with glass houses and polders and so on. And we made actually people experience that traffic space. And that's, I think, my basic message, can be something else. A traffic space, by definition, is public and can be used publicly. It's just a question of the rules and spatial conditions you create. Having that said, it's all about the redefinition of what we think traffic space is, and that comes with not only highways but also with cycle paths and with junctions in the city and so on. So it's a very general thing, and we tend to forget that. I'm also teaching architect students. I kind of like to use that image for that because it's a floor plan of a house. Everybody knows that. And this is actually a Saab advertisement. I didn't draw that up myself, and that was tweeted in the cycle committee quite a lot with the sentence, "How would our houses look like if we would organize them like our cities?" And they would look quite absurd, right? I mean, it's a far too large garage. We give the car a too prominent space, and all the other functions are pushed aside and are too small. And then at one moment I read through Twitter all the comments on those on this image, and there was of course a cycling bubble, so everybody thought it's awful and we shouldn't do that and we should change our cities. And one guy said, "But this is a great apartment. Where can I buy that one? I have a huge garage. I can have a lot of space to do whatever I want. It's multifunctional. I can repair my bike. I can play hockey with my kids in winter and so on." He thought that was a great plan, and he was asking, "What's wrong with you guys? Why don't you like this idea?" And then I thought about it and actually think like, yeah, maybe that was how it looked like some 40 years ago. But what we did the last decades is actually this. This one multifunctional, beautiful space where a lot of things can happen. With one car, we pushed cars in and in and in, and that's what happened. And we don't have any space anymore to do something else. Where we should arrive is maybe this. This one car maybe is not the problem, but we should give that space back to more useful use. And that's, I think, possible only if we really seriously start to think about the redistribution of space and also the privileges that we give certain users in those spaces. And to make that point, I want to show you those two pictures. This is, some of you might know that it's this kind of image, very well known, of a double footprint of mobility. And you see that on the top, it's about the CO2 emissions, and below it's the space it requires per mode of transport. And you see very simply that cycling and walking score best if you put those two together. Yeah? And like innovations like electric vehicles, they actually don't solve much of the space problem in our cities, although they're very clean. So cycling and walking are actually the two things that are most smart and clever, and it's about redistribution of space. And the other one is privileges, and put in this, it seems to be a British cartoon. I don't know this A singer, but that's something that we all experience, right? I mean, if we try to put away a minimum of privileges from car use, we immediately get a huge discussion. Is that fair, and so on. And another one about privileges I want to show is this one, where we have a lot of solutions in traffic space that seem to be made for pedestrians or cyclists, but actually they are car measures. So why do cyclists need to push a button? And it's the main discussion, mainly also in COVID-19 times. Why do a cyclist have to push this button like everybody else, and a car driver gets green automatically, or he has some sensors in the asphalt that would do the job for him? And if you think in that logic, what privileges and technical solutions we use to dedicate those privileges, it's actually quite shocking that, years ago I also thought that a pedestrian crossing, these zebra crossings would be something you do to help pedestrians, but actually it's a way to restrict the place where pedestrians can cross the street, and on all other places where there's no zebra crossing, the car driver can go just the way he wants. So it's actually a pro-car measure and not a pro-pedestrian measure. And I think in that way, there's a lot of things to rediscuss and to renegotiate in terms of privileges that we assign to certain users in public space. I want to show you now two things we did, and as Gavin mentioned those pop-up cycle lanes, and I knew he would. Although the ones in Preston, they remind me a bit of the kind of a light version of the border between kind of Belfast border between Ireland and the Northern Ireland and island. So I don't think they're so beautiful in some way. It's also showing it's a lot of it makes a lot of separation in public space. So we kind of keep on segregating public space. I want to show you an example, not that this is such a great example, but I think there's a reason to work on pop-up lanes. We did that for this little city in Turkey. We wrote this inclusive bicycle master plan for them, and we had a lot of proposals how they could become a cycling city. And they all were very, let's say, detailed and permanent, and we also thought about one temporary one because they needed to experience that. They had no really knowledge how to implement those things. So we thought about this urban boulevard profile that is, as you see, a 2x2 road, where on the one track it was used for informal or could say illegal parking. So it was actually a 1x1 road. And it was used differently with a median, green medians, but impossible for pedestrians to cross, no cycle infrastructure. The shops and terraces were, of course, exposed to that thoroughfare and had not really much quality, so many shops were also empty. So what we proposed them actually to do is refurbishing that profile, reducing car lanes to 2x1, having much larger walkways, a good separated cycle paths on both sides of the lane, and that was our permanent proposal. But then we thought, how could they make the step towards? How could they transform it temporarily? And we actually came across on the left side, you see the existing situation that those black boxes. I don't know if you can see my mouse pointer, but there's a kind of gray box in the row of cars that were kind of trash boxes, and they were placed, of course, all the way to the walkway. But if you would place them on the line, you would make parking in between. You could actually fit in a cycle lane, a pop-up cycle lane, in a protected way. So, of course, those infrastructure is not according to the books. I mean, this dooring accident risk is still quite high. They are not large enough to overtake. So it's not a perfect cycle lane. I'm very conscious about that. But it's actually maybe a good compromise to experience the benefits of a dedicated cycle lane that does not exist in this Turkish town at all at the moment. And that's how we visualize that to make them, to kind of make them try to put that in with some trees and to test it, to experience this benefit of protected cycle lane, where also kids or unexperienced cyclists would dare to cycle, and not only the experienced one that cycle today with cars. I also would like to show you permanent refurbishment. So that's what we do mostly. I already told you, we redesign spaces and make them more livable. This is an example of a small town in Belgium called Leuven, close to Brussels. We were actually had the assignment, it was a competition to redesign a park, but we also thought about putting cycle infrastructure into that park. It's a very extreme floor plan. It's very long and very narrow. It's like 50 to 90 meters wide only, and we had to fit a lot of stuff in. That's the plan. You can see the train embankment in the middle, and then north of it you see this park, and squeezed into that leftover space between houses and railways. And here you see the section, and above you see the section how it was before. So you had a lot of cars. There was mainly car parking in this leftover space, a large road, and very little space for pedestrians and cyclists. And below you see the profile, how we transformed it. And we put the cars down next to the train, so we would get a more quieter zone to the houses. And between the house and the trees, we actually designed a combined profile for bikes and local traffic that still had to access those streets. So actually a kind of bicycle street, you could say, but at the same time, it was on a very important trace route to Tienen, bordering a next door town, and it was considered to be a cycle highway later on. That's how it looked before, typical Belgian roadscape with very unhappy cyclists cycling next to the cars. And that's how it looks today. It's really the same, almost exactly the same spot. So we designed a cycle street. It was two separated lanes of asphalt, not asphalt, concrete, a little separation by natural stones in between. And we tried to generate an environment where we actually hoped, and it actually did work, to have a kind of understanding between the users. It's only local traffic, so we cut the whole length of 1 kilometer in segments in one way, so you couldn't kind of have through traffic, only local traffic. We made it very friendly, good materials, so that people would behave like in a nice environment and not like on the street. And it actually worked quite well. And the design clue, I would say, the interesting thing is that we really thought about how could we prevent cars to overtake cyclists and push them away. So we designed these 2 concrete strokes in such a way that a car normally would not be able to drive on the concrete. It would always be with 2 wheels on those natural stones. It would be a bit uncomfortable, but for the bike, it's very straightforward and comfortable, and for the car, just not so much. And that's how it looks from another perspective. And you can see it here, but it really works actually. The people behave civilized. They don't overtake the cyclists. There's a lot of cyclists now, and we're very happy to see that it actually worked as a space that is not a traffic space, but that's first of all a public space, a nice space to be and to transit through, and that people would behave accordingly. And that's maybe the link also to the art project in the beginning I showed you, that we try to apply the same kind of principle, right? That if you make an environment nice, people would behave nice. And I think that's very important, and we tend to forget that a lot in infrastructure design. That's another view. We also designed a front garden zone to buffer between this bicycle road and the trees with some car parks. So here you see 2 spots that are actually not occupied. That's for the photograph. But on the right side, you see a car parked. And it's very nice to see that almost immediately after, we had a lot of protest also, I have to say. So it was not an easy project. People were really against the project because they said we will not be accessible anymore. There were 1 or 2 shops along the road. They said we get bankrupt. There was a lot of resistance also. But what happened very quickly, and that's the last picture I want to show you, is that people really anticipated that, and they replaced their cars by bikes. And you can see we didn't even plant yet this front garden zone, and people already put rather their transport bikes than their cars up in front of their apartment. So I think that's an example of transition needs infrastructure as a trigger, and that's what we achieved with that, I think. And if you want to know more, I think Gavin already mentioned it, some of those examples are in this book, Traffic Space, Public Space, and also the kind of idea behind it. We really need to transform traffic space into public space, not only in reality, but also in our minds, and see that slightly different. That's it from my side so far.
Thank you very much, Stefan. Really insightful, as I imagined it would be. I kind of love the human aspect of the design that you bring into it. Especially, it's not just about providing a space for cycling. It's all them other things that make the place more human and just a lot more appealing, really. So thank you very much for that. The second speaker we have is James Shen, who is also an architect and founder of the People's Architecture Office, based jointly in Beijing and Los Angeles, if I'm not mistaken. And he was the architect who conceived and brought the People's Canopy to Preston. I think it was 2015, James, I'm not sure. Am I right in saying that? And he joins us today from, I think, Cambridge, Massachusetts. So hello, James, and thank you for joining us.
Hello, Gavin. Thank you very much. I'm very excited to be here. I've been lucky enough to have been to Preston a couple of times. Has left a lasting impression on me, and also really enjoyed working with in certain places, and has really had a big effect on our work, as you'll see today. So yes, we're actually based in Boston and Beijing. More specifically, Cambridge, the U.S. version. And our work is really, the purpose behind our work is really to create a more connected and inclusive society. So I hope you can see this work within that framework. So I tried to find an image of infrastructure, transportation infrastructure in my files. This is in Beijing, so I'll be switching back and forth between images in China and in the US. Would probably give us a good sort of nice contrast in ways of talking about infrastructure and transport and space. But I also, for this talk, I kind of went back and sort of looked up what infrastructure, how it's defined. And one definition is that it is installations and components that form the basis of any system. A system that helps organize society, provide services such as connecting, space for activity, and really structures our society and our cities. So I'll start with some cycle examples. Just earlier, I was talking to Charles from Certain Places and mentioned how difficult it is to resist taking a lot of pictures of all the kind of funny ways that people are using transportation, moving things around, moving themselves around. So this sort of culture, this environment has definitely influenced a lot of our work. So we've done quite a number of projects that are based on cycles, probably more specifically tricycles, that are kind of it's sort of the workers' vehicle in China. This was what we call the tricycle house, and also the tricycle garden. The idea was to sort of propose this way of living that is a little bit more nomadic, basic. Inside the tricycle house, we have all kinds of different facilities that you would need. Also, the tricycle gardens were meant to be to send a message that in a city like Beijing, you really have very few parks, very little green space, and so why not sort of add green space in such a way, and also have people participate in moving it to the places that they need. Other examples of tricycles that would be workspace. I think this would just be probably good for COVID, social distancing or not, or outdoors. Mobile shops that can kind of be moved from one place to another, and then opened up as a kind of a pop-up shop in places where you need more of this space. And this one is kind of an interesting example. It's a little bit different. This is what we call what do we call this? I forgot what this was, but it's a hydroponic garden that's on a structure that can be cycled. But the neat part was that the structure allows you to attach bicycles onto it. So it's a garden that would be transported from one place to another with two cycles that don't come with this structure. So someone would kind of come over and attach this onto their cycle, but you'd have to do this together with another person. And then you can bring this structure that can grow food to different locations. It's solar powered and can work independently of any energy source. So this brings me to just thinking about COVID, and also about just the spaces in which our vehicles, the spaces that support our vehicles. And we found that today you start seeing a lot of spaces, some public, some private. You'll see streets that are meant for cars that are being used in other ways. Here in Cambridge, they've started a program called Shared Streets, where within the same space you share that space with cars, but also pedestrians and cyclists. There's quite a lot of cyclists here, and I think this idea of a city that is a little bit more flexible, that a way of looking at our city where you can allow for more flexibility is quite crucial, especially right now when really there's so much uncertainty as to the future or even the present. So for our cities to be able to function appropriately, our infrastructure probably needs to be thought of in a more open and flexible way. Here's an example of a street that's been covered with a canopy. And also here's an example from China, a couple examples where canopies are expanded outwards at certain times to provide a certain function of these streets, but then closed up during the day when you actually have to provide space for traffic. And so this leads me to Preston. This is a picture from when we were here in Preston with a project called People's Canopy that was commissioned by in certain places. And here you see that we're crossing over one of the major streets that divide the university area and the central area of Preston. Was it the I forgot it, A13 or?
Yeah, it's the ringway, which kind of right through like you said, it kind of bisects the town, so it kind of cuts off the city centre from the university district to a certain degree. Yeah, I think I might actually be in that photo.
Yeah, probably. Hopefully, a lot of Preston is in this photo. But yes, one of the our earliest discussions were about how do you connect these different parts of the city, and clearly these parts are defined by some of the infrastructure. So we had these canopies sort of cycled from the university down to the center to Flag Market, and they were placed in a way that was in a linear fashion down to Preston Market. Preston Market itself also one of the inspirations for the People's Canopy. And then we had these wonderful events, the Lancashire Encounter events. So since then, the project was very well received, and here, Stefan, here we are also in Leuven in Belgium. Leuven was fantastic. They completely understood the idea behind the canopies. Arranged here in a different way, more not in a linear fashion, but grouped, but still events put on by the city. We had lots of people there. It was really a fantastic event. And again, we had this sort of parade-like activity that the public could join in, and bring these canopies to from one place to another, and also rearrange the canopies depending on what was needed. And also, it was interesting that the city kept this program going. It was something that lasted way beyond just that initial event, and they put this online and made it something that people could borrow and use for different activities, different programs in different locations. So it was moved all over to many locations in Leuven, and functioned in different ways. So so that really is a key to this project, is that we are trying to function as a type of infrastructure that would provide for public activity that isn't being provided at the moment by whatever the current infrastructure is. And so in many ways, it's similar to some of the pictures that I showed in China. It's there is this potential need that should be explored, and people want to explore that. And it's also in the spirit of in certain places where you're really prototyping and testing out different ideas for urban space. Now, it'd be quite difficult to do that with building full-scale buildings. There's a lot of discussion, and it makes it very difficult to push a lot of these projects forward. But if you could do it in a lighter way, a way that's very participatory and also temporary, you can almost sketch it out or try it out. So the People's Canopy has really performed that function in many locations, also in different parts of Asia, Hong Kong, and other cities in China, and always working with local authorities for cultural events, public events. So we've been quite pleased by that. I'm going to start moving into a discussion where I'll be bringing in some examples of architecture that I think is relevant to this, and I think this is a good project to start with. This is the People Station, and as you can see, we also included the People's Canopy here. So it allowed, this is a cultural center, and it allowed us to provide a certain amount of flexibility for this building, where we can provide for some expanded space for events, but also we had these appendages, which included the People's Canopy, that could detach and move out into other locations in the community, and basically project some of the cultural assets of this center to other places, hopefully attracting people to the People Station. So we also incorporate these sort of mini People's Canopies into our these tricycles. So in thinking about architecture, I really believe that the way that we approach some of our projects is in this sort of systematic way, thinking about architecture not as a one-off for one site, but something that is meant to be used throughout a community or even a city. And these next projects are projects that we called our plugins, our plug-in houses. And this project started in an area called Dashalai, right in the center of Beijing, right next to the Forbidden City and Tiananmen Square. It's a historic area. And in this area, it's gone through a lot of disinvestment. A lot of people have left. All the red squares here are vacant properties. So you see that it is a kind of a change that is happening throughout this whole entire area. Our proposal was to use the system, this prefabricated system, to build a house inside a house, to basically build a new structure within these old structures. And so I think this brings up a point about infrastructure. Is we also have to think about upgrading our cities in places where people are already occupying these communities, right? They're people just the streets and provide more parks or provide more parking. So in this example, you see we have a lot of existing buildings that are actually in poor conditions, and what we did was we actually left all the buildings intact. We didn't change anything. We didn't tear anything down, and inside we built these plugins. And here you can see these are floor plans of all the plugins that we built in this area. So this is just to show that the system that we have is flexible enough to accommodate all these different situations. Here again, you can see the contrast, the relationship between the old and the new. This is our office, where we're also in this area to make it easier for us to work with locals. But also we took this to other cities. This is a different city called Shenzhen. It's in the south. You had a sort of similar situation, but very different conditions, different reasons why they had all these properties that were left in such poor conditions. But we were able to use a very similar approach and the same system to upgrade these. And I think one thing that is really apparent in these projects is that you also see that the city is something that is constantly changing, and it doesn't, if it's not planned, it's going to continue to move forward as well, to change as well. And people, some places will just take things into their own hands and change their conditions themselves. So we're basically trying to put ourselves within that process to do that in a way that is that could take advantage of all the resources that we can provide. But really, this change is the result of rapid urbanization. At least this is what we see in China, and it can result in really a very disconnected city where you have incredible contrast and disparities. But also, you see this in probably many cities, maybe even most cities. Particularly, you definitely see this in the U.S. And that contrast is maybe something that we get so used to that we don't realize. Although I think COVID today is making this a lot more visible. And I'm originally from Los Angeles, so I'm very familiar with what you see in this picture. And these days, you see a lot of articles about how infrastructure also not only connects places and provides services, but also excludes populations. It also cuts off communities. And now this is something that's very well documented and quite clear. And so this is also something that we're very interested in, something that we definitely are that we like to engage in. And I think these projects that I've been showing try to touch on aspects of this. But these next set of projects are in the U.S. And I think probably more in this context that I just showed with these kinds of segregated communities. And in these projects, we're dealing with housing. This is a more advanced version of the plug-in house. It's an independent structure. And I think in the UK, they're doing this now is there's been a lot of interest in promoting this idea of encouraging private citizens to build houses in their backyards, small houses. In the UK, you might know these as annexes or granny flats, granny units. They're also called accessory dwelling units. So the notion is that you're taking existing space, adding more density, adding more housing to this existing space, or also an existing community with existing services, schools, infrastructure, and basically making it more possible for a larger population to take advantage of that. For us, in order to promote this idea, we engaged in a number of events and installations. So this is to show the plug-in house to people in. This is in Cambridge. This is at Harvard University. We brought these the panels over. Had student volunteers who had never built anything before do this in a single day to demonstrate how quick and easy this can be. And also activated this space. This is right in the center of campus, and brought all kinds of events and activities and discussions that are new to this space. And also repeated this at Boston City Hall. We worked with the Mayor's Housing Innovation Lab. Their work is in policy innovation. So together with us, again, we had roundtable discussions with policymakers, community members, gathered feedback from locals, and also had an exhibition about housing to talk about some of these ideas. And today, the plug-in house is a separate company that we've spun off to provide housing for this situation. I'm gonna finish up with also more sort of COVID-related stuff. This is this hospital that was built in Wuhan. It was shown quite a lot in the news when COVID started. And the interesting thing about it was built in 10 days, and it was kind of like immediate, a very immediate way of dealing with this new situation. Interestingly enough, we were actually using the same system around the same time to build the school. So this is this is by the same manufacturer, and this was a school that was also built very quickly in a place that wasn't originally intended for a school. And this is more recent, a larger school using the same system. But the point is that we're trying to think of ways where you can adopt to changing situations and doing it quickly and in a flexible way in places that weren't designed to for these uses. You can see in the site, it's a very tight site. It was a site that was just left unused, and with the exploding population, they also really needed more schools. And this, after a few weeks of construction, the school opened and it's in use. But yeah, that is pretty much my presentation. Yeah, I hope that some of these projects show how space doesn't have to be thought of in such a monofunctional way. That it could be more flexible and shared, and also hopefully we understand that this is something that we have to do because our world is just changing very quickly. Thanks.
Thank you, James. That's really excellent. I love the whole test beds for ideas concept, because it's like change is inevitable, and I think that using a system which has the ability to be adapted is definitely going to be a useful one for the future. I'm a bit conscious of time, so what I want to do is try and answer some of the questions that we've had online. So we've had one from Piratey Teacup. How do you create safe spaces for cycling in narrow streets? I kind of think that, Stefan, you definitely touched upon this to a certain degree in your presentation, but I know that there is alternative ways that planners get around this. You can give us insight into there.
Of course, I mean, what I told is it's all about space, of course, and if you have space to reorganize, to reallocate, I think that's the first thing to do. So if you have, I mean, I'm now in Austria in a small town called Graz, and you have many streets, narrow streets, where there's still a row of parking, but you cannot cycle in counterflow. Well, then the city has to make a choice, right? Is it more important to have a permeable city where cyclists can go everywhere, or is it more important to have parking in every street? So, I mean, if there's space to take away from less important uses, I mean, it's always a question of negotiation. You might want to think about making the street a one-way street or taking out a row of cars. If there's really no space, I mean, then yeah, you have to mix traffic, and then you need to create the conditions for that to be safe for cyclists. And I think that's, of course, a question of speed, but not only of speed that you put up with a sign or regulation, but that you create a space that tells a certain speed regime. So if you have a sign 30 and you have a straight street with no obstacles in perfect asphalt, nobody will drive 30. But if you make some turns, if you put in trees, you put in benches, make a material that is maybe good for cycling but isn't asphalt, then you can expect people to behave like in a livable street and not like on a highway. I think it's all about. I think there's this guy called Monderman, who's a Dutch traffic engineer, who's promoting shared space for the last decades. He's dead, I think. He once said, if you want, I mean, I try to translate it now in real time. If you want to have people to behave like in a church, you don't need to design a discotheque. And that's the same for traffic space, right? If you want to have people behave like human beings, you need to create a human environment. And quite often that's the trick. And in narrow streets, I think that's the same thing. Just create an environment where people feel, they are not in a traffic space, but in a public space with all its facets, and they will behave accordingly.
Yeah, I think it's very poignant, actually. Yeah, I think that's a good advice. I'm just going to go through another one here. So we've got one from Wood Pigeon, which says, what is the best way to persuade authorities to support projects? I mean, I can kind of see where this question comes from, because it can appear difficult sometimes if there's not an obvious need for these things, how do you change, public behaviour, or when we know what we need, kind of thing. We know what needs to happen, but there's almost like a reluctancy for somebody to make that first move. So I think that's a difficult question to answer to a certain degree.
I'm not sure. I quite often tell politicians and decision makers that their population is probably much further than they think. I'm convinced that the people you hear in terms of protests against refurbishment of streets or so on, it's a minority quite often, and you don't hear the large majority that will actually take benefit of a refurbishment. So my advice to authorities is, don't listen only to the guys that send you emails or that put something on Facebook or Twitter, but really try to get to know what the people want. And quite often, the people are more progressive than politicians think. So, and then from my position, that's why we don't only realize traffic space, but we also write about it, and I give a lot of conferences, and I try to do a lot of capacity building with authorities, that some of the prejudice they have is not true. Cyclists are great clients, and basically all the things we refurbished, local economy went better afterwards, although they all were convinced they got bankrupt if they are not, they don't have 5 car parking places in front of their shop window. And the opposite is quite often true. So it's really about telling the story, showing evidence, showing examples from different cities where it worked, and try to work our way through. I always tell the example, like 20, 30 years ago, we had this discussion that we have now with bicycle roads, with pedestrian zones. Shopkeepers were revolting against the idea of having a pedestrian shopping zone, and that's the most expensive shop locations today. But 20, 30 years ago, people thought that would be their death. And it's the same thing. If you put them a bicycle lane in front of the road, they still think they're going to die. But as soon as realize, they see, hey, those guys, they come with their transport bikes and they buy the expensive biological stuff. And they might buy less in one go, but they come twice as often because they cycle by every day. And, that changes. So it's really about telling the story and reminding politicians that they can be a bit more courageous. The people are already got it.
Yeah, I think that there has been a lot of surveys which suggest that especially I'm talking from a UK perspective, that the population would be is all in favour of making streets more pedestrian and cycle friendly.
It's also one thing, you don't need to tell the people we make a cycle highway, right? You need to tell them we make the street more nice. You can hang out, you can walk your dog, you can meet your friends, and by the way, you can also cycle very well. But it's not we not transform your street into a cycle highway. In Leuven, we didn't tell the people about that. The authorities made it a cycle highway. We told them we make a park, and that's what we actually did. We make a park, and you get a front garden, and you can still park your car there, and there will be a lot of bikes, but it's much more nice than all those cars. And it's a question how you frame it. It's not telling people we're going to take out roads and we put in bicycle lanes, but we make it a much nicer city.
Yeah, absolutely. I think we've probably got time for just one more. I'm not sure how you pronounce that. Natras Claire. I'm keen to know how pollution may influence your architectural plans. Reducing traffic is fantastic, but it would be even better if cycling infrastructure was positioned away from the roadside. I think both of you have shown examples of the ideal solution to those kind of planning issues, really.
I think this is a difficult one to answer. I think, sure, if definitely you could separate cyclists from car, as much as we can. That's ideal, I suppose, in one sense. But also, I think we're talking about very systematic issues here that are very deep, and I think really what we need to think about is how do you reduce pollution just in general, right? And also, why do we have so many cars driving such large distances? Has a lot to do with where your housing is located in relation to where your work is or other locations, right? The amenities. Being able to provide more amenities that are closer together, also this kind of this density that there's a certain amount of density that you would require to provide for this. I think in that way, there's a way to provide for cars and cyclists and pedestrians where there is less pollution. Yeah, also certainly green space.
I mean, from a network planning way, I would say you need to do both. I think you need to make cycle roads that are separated from infrastructure in parks, along rivers or canals. But you also need the ones next to the through roads, and then people have a choice. I'm a big fan of offering choices to people. If you have a bicycle network that offers you the possibility to cycle fast and quick and maybe a bit dirty on the highway or next to the highway, and parallel to that, a very nice, smooth way with some parks, some shops, a little whatever playground, but it takes you a bit longer. People have a choice, and that's what we actually try to realize in the Netherlands a lot now. So they have a good basic network, but try to give them choices. You know, the fast one, and sometimes people the slow one, the nice one, and sometimes people on the same day they go very fast to the station in the morning because they're in a hurry and they want to cycle with the cars next to a highway or a large road. But then when they come back after work, they want to relax, and it doesn't matter if they take 20 minutes more and they can cycle a longer road parallel to it. I think it's really important to offer choices in the network configuration.
I think that's one of the I think one of the problems that planners have always struggled with in the past is the fact that things like the bicycle and and other forms of transport to a certain degree, but most definitely the bicycle it's such kind of a versatile vehicle in a way. It can travel at the same speed as somebody walking, or you can get off and walk with it, but then at the same time it can travel at the same speed as of a car, and then sometimes planning for that maybe makes it a little bit trickier. Maybe not, but it kind of strikes me that sometimes it's just there's a difficulty there to figuring out how infrastructure should kind of how infrastructure accommodates that kind of difference in pace almost, and how then people can kind of go off piste to a certain degree. That's what the bicycle also allows you to do, doesn't it? It allows you to stop wherever you want and nip over there, and and whereas the car is a very regimented system.
Yeah, I mean the bicycle doesn't exist. I mean James's examples from China and their own design shows very well. A bicycle can be so much, right? And I'm busy with cycling for quite some years now, but I would not dare to predict what kind of vehicles we have in 10 years on the bicycle paths. I really don't. I mean, if you would have asked me 10 years ago, I would not have foreseen these enormous logistic bikes from DHL that are like little trucks with trailers, and I wouldn't have foreseen the armada of electric steps and dockless systems and so on. And I have no clue what will be on the cycle lane in 10 years, but exactly for that reason, I think we need to be really, really flexible in one sense when planning cycle infrastructure, but also don't think too small. So always, I mean, that's a German saying, but and I cannot translate that now, but it's you really think big, maybe it's it best. Right? Don't be too modest. I mean, most of the examples we had built, when they were open, they were already too small. Right, so parking garages at train stations, it's a super example. I mean, you build them, you think they're huge. How can you build 1,000 bike parking spots for this station, and then the day it opens, it's too small, and you need to extend it. And the same with the widths of bicycle lanes. I think we need to really think larger and bigger, and to be future-proof, right? And this whole COVID situation showed that, I mean, if we cannot rely on public transport for those reasons, or we cannot afford cars anymore, people will get on a bike or they will walk. I think it's the same thing. We need to also think big in terms of walking. So this uncertainty should be a reason to maybe think a step bigger and dare to dedicate even more space to these forms of mobility.
I think also related to the previous question, one thing that designers and artists can do is help imagine possibilities, right? As Stefan was just saying, it's really hard for us to know what's going to be coming next. But I think for us to be able, we have skills to help visualize things instead of only using words to describe possibilities, right? And also we have skills to implement some of these ideas in a more visceral way where people can participate and see for themselves, right? So I think that relates to the prototyping and and demonstrating some of these ideas as a way to also bring more people in the community and also authorities into the same discussion. So regardless of what the answers might be, I think our power to visualize and to experience is also really important for this discussion.
Yeah, and I think infrastructure and also cycle infrastructure is done by people who really lack that capacity quite often still. So it's a traffic engineering topic, and traffic engineers, I know a lot of, they're great. I mean, they do a good job, and I don't want to bash them, but they have a certain logic they follow up since decades, and that's efficiency, that's flow, that's safety, and many of those things don't apply in the same way to cyclists. Of course, you want to have safe infrastructure. I mean, I'm not going to diminish that argument, but it's not the only thing. Cyclists are in direct contact with the environment. They experience a lot. They interact. They are much more socially capable because they see each other. They are used to react. If you don't react on your immediate environment, you're quite quickly dead on a bike because you will get run over by the next truck. So you have to anticipate, and this is a quality that needs to be really cherished. And cycle and traffic engineers, they are not really trained to think in that direction. I think they're designers, artists, landscape architects. They can really help a lot in putting in that perspective and participating when we design traffic spaces. And even more when it comes to experiencing experiments and foreseeing the future and visualizing them, I think artists and creative people really can help a lot in making this transition. So I completely follow the idea of James that it's really urgent and important that artists look into that, and that's why I really like his work. It starts from the vehicle, and it has to do with the environment. And I'm designing cycle paths, but I mean, it's kind of very much related. So I think it's really good.
Absolutely. I believe that we're about to run out of time. I kind of feel that we've only touched on some of the subject, but that's always the way that these things are. But thank you both very much for joining us this evening. Really insightful, as I imagined it would be, and like I said, I'm sure we could go on about other things, COVID cycle lines and the whole health angle and plug-in systems. But it's been really great to speak to you both, and thank you very much. Hopefully we can do it again.
Thank you, Gavin and James.
Thank you, Stefan. Thanks, Gavin.
Thank you very much. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Thank you to those who's joined us online as well.